Okay. Got it.
So we want to welcome you back to the last segment of our series on teaching empathy to our kids. It's been really a great 10 weeks to kind of go through all just the ins and outs of this really critical world, not just for our kids, but for communities today. And so what we're going to do, again, we've been focusing on the book Unselfie by Michelle Borba. But for our last part today, we're actually going to go outside the book. We're going to talk about kind of an acronym, an abbreviation that really can signify the key aspects of empathy in general. I think that for all of us, Jamie would definitely agree. Sometimes it's nice to have something very quick to kind of reference for your memory and to kind of like jog. Oh yeah, like those are the key aspects in the midst of a busy day. And so not surprisingly, our acronym, our word is empathy, right? As we talk about the critical components of empathy. Boy, we really got creative there, Jamie, on that one, didn't we? So,
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking about all my studying for the licensing exam, and I'm like, wow, these mnemonics really come into play, but you
yeah,
just got to go with what you have. So
gotta go
empathy
with
it
your hand.
was.
Yep,
Don't make it harder than it needs to be, right?
that's right, right. Why would we choose a synonym if the word we really want to talk about is empathy here? So
Exactly.
that's what we're
Exactly.
gonna do. So, in that spirit, we're gonna go forward and we're gonna just kind of reflect and share, probably pull from some of the previous series on E for empathy, and all the way through all the letters and how this corresponds to kind of where our focus should be. So our first, for the E of empathy, the first critical area that we really want to talk about is, and we said so much about, is the idea of enthusiasm. And Jamie, I was thinking about this today. So Jamie and I are big football fans. Jamie hails from the University of Georgia, which right now, as we speak, is doing quite well across the
Yeah.
college landscape, and does kind of seems to be on their way maybe to a national championship again,
Fingers crossed.
right? And
Yeah.
so I unfortunately have chosen teams like the Chicago Bears that are not doing so well, but we stick with our teams here. So,
Right.
but one of the things I think that and I reflect on the idea of enthusiasm is that makes football a lot of fun, especially if you're at a game, is that level of fervor, that level of enthusiasm that people bring to it, right? So no matter what you think about football and if you hate it or love it or whatever, the reality is if you've ever been in a stadium, a full stadium for a game, I mean, the enthusiasm is just contagious and it is like impossible to not feel, right? There's other sports and things where maybe you would say, oh, it's kind of a quieter place or you don't feel it quite as such, but a full football stadium is all about enthusiasm, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I would like to say from this idea is that, whatever you love in your life, it's easy to bring enthusiasm to that. But the key here for empathy is we've got to bring enthusiasm to this idea too, right? Both in teaching it and embracing it and in modeling it, because the reality is that when people, and this is especially true with our kids, when they see us being enthusiastic about things, it's contagious too. And they might laugh and they might think, oh, dad, you're kind of goofy or whatever. But they recognize enthusiasm and it breeds its own level of enthusiasm too.
Yeah. I know. I just think about like anytime you try to do stuff with kids, like is the first goal is just to make it fun. And when you're not having fun, it's clear, right? Kids can see through some of those things pretty clearly. And being honest to that experience to yourself and allowing yourself to be enthusiastic about whatever it is you're doing, your kids will pick up on that and they'll realize like, hey, this is a genuine excitement that, we're doing this together or that we're being able to, try this new thing or help these people out. And kind of running through all of this idea of like modeling it for your kids because again, some of it comes from that inherent wanting to help, but also like being able to say, or for them to be able to see how excited you are and really into it, that it's not just another thing to check off, but it's actually meaningful to you. So,
I've
yeah.
seen this happen in the world of empathy with our kids are really fortunate. They have a great youth group leader at our church, and they've been really involved in a lot of different areas of service. And Mary Jo, is really great about bringing enthusiasm into these activities, which again, they see, it's contagious. They kind of like latch onto, and even if it might be something that is kind of, provokes some nerves or uncertainty for them, her leadership, her enthusiasm there really creates that empathy, advantage from the get-go. So E is our, word today for enthusiasm. I'll let Jamie share a little bit about our M from the empathy standpoint.
So M, we went with meaningful connection. And this, if you think back to the past 9 weeks, one of the biggest pieces is this idea that when we allow ourselves to connect on an emotional level with others, whether it's parents with their kids, kids with other kids, adult with other adult, whoever we're connecting with, the number one way to improve the chances that that spontaneous empathetic experience happens is through that exposure to a meaningful connection. Again, we live in a world that is very one screen away from a meaningful connection. As I stare into a screen and Jim's office is right down the hallway, I'm very aware of myself saying that. But, luckily we have the chance to have lots of meaningful connections with each other. And in our department, in our field, it's something that I really enjoy. And I can tell just in my practice that when I have a kid sitting in here versus a kid on telehealth, it is different. And so all of that to say that when we're able to kind of break down that screen barrier and go out and meet people in the real world where they're at, it just increases the opportunity that we can experience those deep human emotional experiences. The meaningful connections, while the internet has done a lot of great things, I don't want to discount that. It's a different type of meaningful connection. And I worry that the type of connections being created only on the internet don't have that human piece behind it. The opportunity to use your emotion identification skills, really feel and see what somebody else is feeling and seeing, is not the same when you're not there exposed to it in the moment. And I think that the more opportunities you have for your kids to experience this, for them to see you experience it, is just going to bring up all of those opportunities to do all of the other amazing things that we know about empathy that give the empathy advantage.
As you were describing that, without overdoing the M's here, I was thinking that meaning, here's the sentence that comes to mind: meaning makes me feel I matter. And, we were talking about the research around mattering, that concept, that sense that one of the reasons why volunteering and other things is so good, not just for the person you're giving to, but yourself, is that you really feel that you matter to others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, pursuing these meaningful connections makes me feel that I matter, and it makes our kids feel that they matter in this world, right? And sometimes it's really easy to get down on yourself because things aren't going well on your end, or things aren't turning out the way you want them to turn out. But when you start to have these, like you said, meaningful encounters in your day, and you recognize that you really matter on so many different levels, then there is that sense of, and this is the empathy advantage, right? Of growing in your own sense of self-confidence, or decreasing your own anxiety or catastrophizing or whatever else it is. And so I think that the meaningful connection, this M part, is really key, obviously to empathy, but also to the psychological aspects that make empathy so good for us. I think this is probably one of the biggest keys related to that, because it runs a conduit from one person to another, which creates a whole other avenue of growth there. So
yeah, I know. I was thinking about even this idea, and I think you've talked a little bit about this on the podcast in the past, is having those difficult conversations with your kids or just with other people, being able to have those conversations on a basis of a meaningful connection, versus being someone I've never seen or heard before, trying to tell me something that may or may not be well received. Those two conversations go two different ways without, number one, having a connection, but at least knowing that a meaningful connection can be made. If I don't feel connected to others in general, I'm not going to be open to hearing feedback or being exposed to being vulnerable when I feel, this trust or these connections aren't present for me. So I just think in general, it allows for that sense of safety and of mattering. Like, I know other people and my connection to other people matters. So
absolutely.
I think it's really key.
So E is for enthusiasm, M is for meaningful connection, and I will dive into P, which is the pursuit of kindness, right? And so let's think about this pursuit of kindness, right? We live in a world that really loves to criticize. We live in a world that loves to find all the things that are wrong and kind of like, put that out there. And again, I think what often gets lost there is that those people, in general, do want to experience kindness themselves, but we've kind of cultivated a very divisive landscape. And so this pursuit of kindness, we were talking about this before. It's like, it's also the pursuit of just giving the gift of kindness too, right? It's the sense of like saying, hey, you know what? Like I have a choice here. Like my feelings might be really kind of roused up. I'm not even sure like where, I'm at on the entire landscape, but I like to pursue kindness because it allows all of us to participate in a very equitable way, right? And so I think as we think about the P, this pursuit of kindness, it's really the sense of teaching our kids. And I would say this is a very young age. Jamie, we think about like teaching empathy to 3 and 4 year olds, but like showing them how they can be kind, even when something goes not their way, or even when somebody else does something that's not kind too. That it's actually the early advent of, I would say, even self-control or allocation of our ability to do that. So,
Right. Yeah, this is one of like of all the 7 things, I think this is the one that is the hardest for me because of my own want, and I'm a very emotional person, that I think that it underlies emotion regulation the most, because regardless of how I'm feeling in that moment, kindness should, in my mind, or could supersede all of that, and that I don't need to let my emotions be taken out on others. It's not easy. We're going to talk a little bit more about this idea of grace to yourself and always remembering that you're humble in this process. But, it's the pursuit of that is really the key. As much as kindness is important, it's the pursuit of, because again, we've talked about several times now, we're not always going to make the most out of every situation, or a missed opportunity will come up. But the pursuit of always wanting to be kind and live in this way is, the action is as meaningful. It's as the pursuit itself.
Yeah, and it's especially true. Think about situations when our kids run into at school where, again, someone has a strong reaction or does something that's annoying or frustrating. And our human tendency is just to kind of react back to that. It's kind of like give what I just got. But the pursuit of kindness here, why it's so key with the empathy idea, is their ability to look through that negative response and look into the person and say, hey, you know what? Like, you're not all defined by what you just did. In fact, I kind of wonder if you've had a rough day, or I wonder if things are going on. And even though my gut reaction is to come back to you in a negative way, I think I'm going to pursue something deeper. Like I think I'm going to go deeper with this one here. And you might be listening and think, well, that sounds like a lot to ask for an 8 year old. But actually, the reality is that an 8 year old and all of the rest of us can do it too, if we have this kind of like pursuit that's omnipresent in our lives, right? If you don't, you're probably just going to react back negatively, and you're probably going to be annoyed, and that's the end all. But I like this because maybe of all the ones on our acronym, it might be the easiest gift to give, irregardless of the situation, and it might be the quickest gift you can give in any situation, right? And I remember even over the years of like, this is a very simple example. We talked about the running analogy through this a little bit, but even like running, and you're running a race, and the simple things that people say during the race, like, "Oh, hey, man, it's really great," like it really, you guys, you're doing awesome. They're saying that to other people, but even the sense of just them being kind at that point elevates your spirit a little bit, and it elevates the potential to go on. So,
Yeah. And I want to just say really quickly too, as I'm thinking about my own life and all of this, I think it's not to say that you can't still have the feeling of being hurt by others or angry with what they did, but it's your reaction back, right? Rather than that gut reaction of I'm going to cause them that same feeling, is more of like, I'm going to allow myself and honor that feeling in myself because it's true to who I am, but not feel that the response has to be the same back. And I think that is the biggest where I don't want people to get confused, that we're saying you can't be angry with others. That's natural and normal. It's the fact of like what your response to whatever feeling it is through that, like you said, omnipresent lens of putting your kindness out into the world, because it'll make you feel better. And honestly, like you said, someone having a bad day, making you feel bad, or their actions have made you feel bad, they may just need somebody to smile and say what's really going on behind that, to change their whole day too. So
absolutely, very good. All right, I'm gonna let you take the letter A, not number A, letter A. So we've got
Number A.
E for enthusiasm, M for meaningful connection, P for pursuit of kindness. And what is our A here, Jamie?
So our A is the attitude of empathy. And it's kind of a similar idea to the pursuit of kindness in that it's less about the day-to-day action and more about how you're approaching this empathy idea, which is again kind of going back to what I was saying. The way I interpret what that means is it's less about, okay, was that an empathetic thing to do, yes or no, and more about this overall like omnipresent, I'm going to have an attitude of compassion rather than guardedness, right? So when I'm looking, on my day, looking back on my day, was I trying hard to understand and feel others and meet them where they were at? Or was I kind of not worried about those things, focused on myself, not thinking about others and the way they were feeling and even how my actions affected them?
Mhm.
But what I want to put the caveat with this is there's a difference between having an attitude of empathy and feeling guilty for doing everything you're doing that's genuine to you. So, just always, as with everything, moderation is key. And that if you don't have the emotion regulation within yourself to say, hey, I even maybe did upset someone, I apologized, we've remediated and resolved the conflict, to kind of be able to say, I'm not going to let that, rule violation or whatever ruin my whole day because I'm so overly upset about it and so empathetic for hurting somebody else, because we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes at times, but just this attitude of wanting to cultivate an empathetic environment for which you and your family live in is really what this is about. Again, it's about that pursuit rather than every single thing has to be this way. I don't know if you have thoughts about.
I was thinking, kind of a visual analogy of this is if you take the pursuit of kindness and the attitude of empathy and working together, it's kind of like the attitude of empathy is the structure behind our electrical system in our house, right? You have to have the framework to make our lights and everything else available to us, right? Without the framework, there's no light, right? And there's no
Right.
electricity. So the attitude of empathy for me is the framework by which we approach our life. The pursuit of kindness is kind of like the electricity flowing outward into, the light itself, right? The refrigerator, everything else. It's like one is the framework and the other is the action step of that. And so they have to kind of work together.
Right.
But I think in general, that's the sense is that, when you look at even the early kids, young kids, as they're growing up and their sense of kind of their view of the world, do they look at the world through an empathetic lens or do they look at the world through, as, Michelle Barber talks about, kind of more of a self-absorbed lens? And that's really the kind of the idea here is that you really, from a young age, we have to cultivate this empathy idea and framework because the older we get, let's be very honest, it's not that we can't all change at any age, but the older we get, if our framework has been increasingly established in a very absorbed, one-sided way, gosh, it's going to be hard to see things in a different light. And you're going to, every criticism that comes your way might be interpreted in a really negative way, like they're out to get me. And, every thing that happens to other people, you might just kind of look at them again and have a visceral reaction, not more of a human reaction. So I think that framework remains really important.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right, so E for enthusiasm, M for meaningful connection, P for pursuit of kindness, A for attitude of empathy, and T, this is probably one of my favorite ones here, is the idea that empathy really is about trust building. And I think I want to come back to something that we talked about a few sessions back or a few seminars back. And to think about trust, like how do we build that with other people? And there's really two things. There's a sense of other people coming to know that we want the best for them. Like we desire goodness for other people, right? And they come to see us in that way. And the second is that they also come to know us as someone who is seeking out truly what's going on, like the reality as it is, even if it's inconvenient or difficult or whatever, right? And I think that when we think about this T of empathy, this trust building, ask yourself, do people see me as an agent of goodness, of constantly wanting the best for all people, regardless of how much we get along or not? And do people see me as an agent of someone who really wants to understand things as they are, not as they necessarily want them to be or need them to be, right? And so I think that when we think about the framework of trust building, it's really those two areas that for our kids, You know what? I mean, that's such a core important thing to teach our kids because their relationships are going to have a lot to do with how much they build this sense of trust around others. And it's interesting, even as our kids are in different ages in our own house, and they come home with stories about, other kids and about themselves, you can kind of get a sense they're people are already feeling out at a young age, like how trustworthy are you? How much are you not? Like, and whether we like it or not, that it's happening as we go forward in life there.
Yeah. And I just think too, as parents, it's really important to recognize that building trust with your kids and showing them that, those two aspects are present, again, doesn't mean that you have to be a permissive parent that doesn't allow, that allows your kids to do whatever they want in the
Oh,
pursuit
no.
of goodness. It's actually that what we know is that the parent who provides that structure within which the child can expect the same thing every time, can really learn to operate within the rules make sense, but the parent also spends the time to explain to the child why, right? And really, again, this comes again to that meaningful connection piece of like, you're not going to trust somebody that you feel like you don't have a connection with. And so if your child isn't exposed to healthy, meaningful connections with parents and caregivers, then they're not going to feel that they can be vulnerable and engage in these really difficult emotional conversations as they get older, when that basis is, I don't feel the people around me, one, have a meaningful connection with me, and two, are pursuing really truly what is best for me, that they may be pursuing what they think is best or what others think is best. And I do think trust is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot without actually really realizing that the significant impact it can have on early childhood development. And I think I feel I see that a lot here in the office, is that underlying mistrust of something somewhere that can really be detrimental beyond empathy, but especially within this idea of, if I can't trust my own environment and those around me, I can't open myself up to feeling for others as well.
So the research behind this, as Jamie knows, they look at psychosocial stages of development with kids. And the very first stage of life when it comes to psychosocial development is the sense of trust versus mistrust for the people around you, right? And your environment in general. And obviously they find that kids who develop a good sense of trust in those around them start to form themselves in positive ways. But those who kind of are mired in distrust for various reasons, from an early age, start to kind of struggle with attachment, with kind of like, again, later relational areas. And so it's a big one. It's a really, we talk about in the empathetic world, and but it's a big one across all worlds. And if you really really trust someone, like at the end of the day, the things that you're able to exchange and like share and like take and give are quite phenomenal, and they're really quite life-giving. And so I think that that's where we land here. All right, you get the H here. So enthusiasm, meaningful connection, pursuit of kindness, attitude of empathy, trust building, and the H is,
The H is humility.
oh my gosh, nobody likes this one. Oh, how did we
No,
get this one? No.
no, because this is like, I hear this in the back of my head all the time, and I'm like, okay, right? But it really is just, I feel being kind of on the border between a millennial and a Gen Z and not really fitting in with any kind of generation, if you will. Humility is something I think that, and Dr. Borba talks about this a lot, is really lacking in a lot of our kids, because we want our kids to feel special and we want our kids to feel like they can be anything or do anything. And I don't want to sound like I'm saying, well, some kids just can't. It's not really about that. It's more about how you show that to others. It's about being confident, but also realizing you are not the end all be all, right? Nobody can talk about, I can't talk about somebody else's experience truly as though it's mine. I can feel for them. I can try my best to understand and act in a way that is honoring and respectful of that. But I only know what I know, and I have to be humble about that. We all do. And as parents, I think it's really hard to be humble. Parents feel like they have to be the end all be all, the know everything, the final answer, if you will, to all of the questions. But I think one of the ways that we can really open ourselves up and take that off of ourselves is to say, It's okay not to know. It's okay not to have all the answers. And at the end of the day, again, it's the pursuit rather than the final product that makes this such a meaningful and important journey to embark on. And without this kind of feeling of humility and knowing that you don't know really much about other people at all, and the whole purpose is to explore and question and get to know, is really where this journey lies. I don't know if you want to add, I'm sure you want to add, but this was definitely a Jim word, humility. He said, I have one for H. And I was like, all right, here we go.
There we go. So, two thoughts. So years ago, I heard someone give a really wise perspective on humility, and they made it very clear that we often think that the opposite automatically of humility is being braggadocious and boisterous, like really kind of bragging on ourselves, which, to some extent is true. But they also said that the opposite is false modesty. And the key of humility is to understand your worth in this world. I love this idea that they convey, to understand your worth in this world, but to also understand that you have relied so much on other people and institutions and environments and everything else to be able to even like do the things that you've done, right? So true humility is not like being falsely modest, nor is it, of course, bragging yourself out of the gym. But it's understanding you have great worth. We all have great worth, and we need to see that in other people. But at the same time, it's like understanding that so many other people have contributed to your ability to do the things you do. I think that was one of the best things I've ever heard about humility before. And it reminds me, and I know we've got about 5 minutes left here, of one of the, I think, most humble stories I've ever heard. Her name is Liz Murray. People came to know her as the homeless to Harvard story. She wrote a great, great book I recommend to anyone called Breaking Night. And she got up on stage here at UE, the local university, and I got to see her speak. And she said, I think a lot of people think I'm just one of these people that like pulled myself up by my bootstraps and pushed through all the things that were difficult for me and ended up at Harvard and everything else. And she said, I want to tell you that first and foremost, that that's totally the wrong story. Even though my life was difficult and I had some challenges, lots and lots of people contributed to even giving me the opportunity to be standing here today. And if it wasn't for them, it wouldn't have happened. And as she's sitting there in a very raw way telling the story, I thought, that's humility. Like, that's it, right? And that's what we want our kids to not only embody, but I think our culture in general really, really needs that. And to truly be humble is to be empathetic. Like, those two have to go together, right? So yeah, maybe it was a Jim contribution, although I think Jamie's right there with me, but I think it really rounds out well. And so
Yeah.
finally, here we are at the end of empathy, enthusiasm, right? Meaningful connection, pursuit of kindness, attitude of empathy, trust building, and humility. And the why might seem the most obvious of all, but the why is it's you, right? Y-O-U. You are the change maker. And I think as we leave this series and kind of say goodbye to the 10 parts that we've done, the essence is, what more empowerment can we give to our kids than to say, you can really change. It sounds trite, but you can change the world through your interactions with others and the way that you really truly come to see them as someone of great worth and of great value and of great context and of great experiences, all these things coming together into one human being, right? And I've said this before, I think that, all of our lives are a story being told, and it's not so much where we go, but it's how we play the part that we're given in life. And, we've all been given different parts in different ways. And I think that, part of the why, of you being the change maker from an empathetic perspective, is seeing that everyone else has a story too. And you know what? When you're curious and you're considerate and you're loving about that story, your relationships will flourish, right? And so I'm going to leave the final word to Jamie on this one here as we go forward last couple of minutes, and say that you are really the difference when it comes to the empathy advantage.
I think that is one of the things that, in my 29 years has been the hardest lesson for me to learn is, that I am a change maker in my own life. But I think what I want this whole series to mean and what it means to me and what I've taken away from it is this sense of empowerment, that it is one action at a time. That's what underlies a lot of those stories and research that Dr. Borba talks about throughout the book, is one school or one lesson that a teacher does, or one school district, or one, community in another country, that she sees these sparks happening. It doesn't have to be something elaborate. It doesn't have to be millions of dollars and years of work. It's one moment at a time, making the most of that with this empathetic framework, with this meeting people and yourself where you're at. Some days we have the capacity to be kinder than others. But that at the end of the day, we all have this inside of ourselves. And as parents, I think just reminding yourself of that, as you work to make your kids the best that they can be. That's all a parent wants in this world. And these 7 ways are just things to bring forward with you as you continue to grow these tiny humans into bigger humans. That we all just want them to be resilient, happy, successful, and the empathy advantage really provides that in a great way. So yeah,
And so with that, there you go. With that, we would say, hey, we hope this 10 weeks has been great. We hope it's kind of really like excited you about the opportunities from the empathy advantage, and we go forward, right? And we pass along to others. So as Jamie and I sign off, I hope you have a great week and a great empathetic life in general. So goodbye.
Bye.